All right, so in this we are going to be looking at the adaptive, or sometimes called the specific immune system. Um, this is a really amazing thing, and I wish we had like a full chapter to really look into this. This is it's very complicated. We're going to try to make it as simple as we can. Um, it is a deep subject. People that study this for their entire lives still learn and find out how little they know as they move along. But this is actually what we're dealing with right now in the whole situation with COVID. So, anyway, let's start. So, we talked about in a previous video the innate or nonspecific defense and how the skin was your first line of defense, all the others were second line of defense, and that was fever, inflammation, different chemicals, stuff like that. Well, this is considered the third line of defense, and it is going to only fight certain things that it wants to. And as it says here, is resistant to particular pathogens. So, for instance, chickenpox. Long before there was immunizations, what they would do is if you had chickenpox, if a kid had chickenpox, they'd take all the other kids in the neighborhood, they would get them to play together, everybody would get sick at the same time, and you'd develop immunity. Now, that immunity was natural immunity. We're going to look at that in another video a little farther down the line. But once that happened, you were pretty much immune to it. You developed a third line of defense, and it was against chickenpox. Now, no other virus would stimulate it to attack, just chickenpox. So that's why it's specific. And it has to learn how to fight it. That's why it's adaptive. So this response is based on the ability to distinguish molecules that are part of the body, considered self, versus the non-self. And so these cells go through all over your body, and they're checking each cell to tell if it's you or not you. Antigens, now we looked at these in blood typing. We said they were the things that were on the cell surface. Well, an antigen specifically is a non-self molecule that can elicit an immune response. This is what your adaptive defense or immune system looks at, the antigens that are on cells. And it's either going to say, is it me or it's not? And certain ones will elicit an immune response. Now, one of the things I will tell you is there's a name that this book really doesn't use a lot, but in the antigens, there is a specific part of that big molecule that is what really sets my defenses off, and it is called an epitope. And I will tell you that's in future classes, that's probably something that would be a good thing to remember. An epitope is the specific part of an antigen that is what elicits an immune response, what sets off our defenses. So adaptive responses are carried out by the lymphocytes and macrophages that can recognize specific antigens. There are two types of adaptive defenses. One is called cellular immune response, one is called humoral. All right. Cellular immune response is going cell to cell. It is fighting like a boxer. The cells that do this are going to actually go and engage the other cells and fight. That's why it's called a cellular immune response. The word humoral means body fluid. All right, that's why in the eye we had the aqueous humor and the vitreous humor. Humor is old school wording for body fluid. This will use antibodies, which travel in plasma, body fluid. So the humoral immune response is all about the release of antibodies that are going to use the body fluids to travel to where it needs to go. So cellular is going to be fighting cell to cell. Humoral is going to be fighting using antibodies. It's kind of like Air Force sending out jets to go get them. I will just go ahead and tell you, cellular immune response is going to be carried out by T cells. Humoral immune response is going to be carried out by B cells. And that's what we're going to look at in an upcoming video. But when we look at this, I don't want you to get the idea that, one of these is just working on its own. They're all working together. It's not that, this third line, this adaptive immunity is just, it only works if this doesn't work. No, everything is working at the same time, and actually they feed off of each other. And again, this is going to be such a superficial going over of what's going on. It is so much more complicated than this. But it just starts with a pathogen that enters the body. It has to get across that first line of defense, which is the skin and the mucous membranes that we looked at in the previous video. Once it gets by there, it enters the body, and then I'm going to have the non-specific immunity that's going to be fighting, no matter what it is, inflammation, fever. I'm going to cause phagocytosis to increase. These natural killer cells, which we said were types of lymphocytes, are just going through killing everything. But at the same time, I'm going to have something that's going on, the educated line of defense, this third line. It is going to see if this pathogen is something we recognize, I will automatically start this. If it is something that I do not recognize, I'm still going to work on this third line of defense, but it's going to take a little while to get it ready. All right, so as we go through, hopefully those will all make sense. So an antigen, again, remember it's simply a receptor on the surface. It's receptor on the surface of cells that enable lymphocytes to recognize non-self versus self. So there's going to be receptors on the surface of lymphocytes that are going through and they're testing. They're like little, imagine a lamp and the light, the electric cord. All the little sockets in our body, that electric cord fits basically. Once we get to a socket that it doesn't fit, I know it's not my house. That's what's going on here. Now, these antigens can be several different things. I'm not worried about you knowing this. They can be proteins, they can be large sugars or large carbohydrates, they can be a combination of carbohydrates and proteins, and they can even be a combination of carbohydrates and lipids. Not a big deal, not really worried about that at this point in time. If you go farther and you get more into the medicine of things, you'll need to know these. But right now, not worried about that. The most effective antigens are large complex molecules. And they can, because they're harder to copy. Now, here's the other thing. We have these things called haptens, which are just small molecules. Now, this is simply something that is not an antigen per se, but the molecule itself, now it's not attached to a cell body somewhere. This molecule itself can cause an immune response. Now, again, I could spend the next 30 minutes trying to talk about haptens, but in this book, that's the only time it really talks about it really from there. So just know where an antigen is a complex molecule on a cell surface, we can have molecules that are not attached to cells that are called haptens. And they're generally small, and they can produce the same immune reaction as an antigen. Lymphocytes. All right, so lymphocytes are the cells of this system, right? And they are two types. We've got T cells and B cells, and we're going to look at these. So lymphocytes are produced throughout life, starting during fetal development. Again, early on, our body's making these. They all are birthed in the red bone marrow. Only the unspecialized lymphocytes go into the blood. If it's going to be a T cell, it goes to the thymus, and there it settles and it gets specialized. It gets trained. It gets programmed. Basically, different proteins get put into its membrane to prepare it for what it's going to do. The other half, which would be B cells, differentiate in bone marrow, and then they are released. All right. So that's a difference between T and B cells. All right. So we've got lymphocytes as a general. They're created as they're being created in the red bone marrow. One half stays in. They are B cells. They get mature and then they get released. The other half are the T cells. They end up leaving, they go out to the thymus, and then they become T cells. Educated, mature T cells. Then they go out to fight their battle. Now, T cells, which the name means thymus-derived lymphocytes, they specialize in the thymus, which we've been saying. After release, they make up the majority of the lymphocytes. B cells are kind of special, but the most of them, up to 2/5 are going to be, or 4/5 are going to be a T cell. Now, again, the T cells can live in lymph nodes. They can live in the white pulp of the spleen. They can hang out in different areas, and they're fighting things. And again, they fight hand to hand. They are the cellular immune response. Now, this one I just do not get. B lymphocytes, B cells. Now, I've always been told that they were called B cells because they stay in the bone marrow. This book says that it comes from the bursa of forbicaris in chickens. I don't even know what in the world that is. I will never ask you this question. And if someone asks you on a question on if we've got some kind of standardized test in this class, or like if we have one that the whole school takes, if that question's on there, I will automatically give you credit for that, because that's just crazy talk. So I want you to know B cells mature in the bone marrow. They are a smaller percentage of lymphocytes. They will be found in the lymph nodes, the spleen. But one of the things is they're found in the intestinal lining. All right. So again, not a big deal, not going to get crazy with that. But what I do want you to know about B cells, they are about humoral immune response, because they are the ones that create the antibodies. So the lymphocyte origins, like it says, they're going to be created in the red bone marrow. It shows it coming out of the medullary cavity. Don't get confused. They will be being produced in spongy bone, in the red bone marrow and spongy bone. The B cells are going to mature there. They're going to be released. They will stay in certain areas of lymph nodes. They'll also be in areas like the spleen, as well as, like we said, the intestinal tract. The T cells leave before they're mature, and they go to the thymus. At the thymus, they become educated and mature, and they are then called T cells. T cells also will go and they'll hang out at the spleen, they'll hang out at the lymph node. T cells fight hand to hand. That's why they're called cellular humoral cells. B cells are going to be producing things like antibodies, which we'll look at in another video, and because of that, they are humoral immune response. This is just a comparison of the T and B cells, where they both originate. They both originate in red bone marrow. They will mature in different areas. The thymus, T cell, thymus, bone marrow for B cells. Right? Now, they both, when they're out in, like, say, a lymph node, they can make clones of themselves. Right? T cells are the most abundant, up to 80%, where B cells, anywhere from 20 to 30%. So T cells are the most common. T cells provide cellular immune response. B cells provide humoral immune response. So this is the difference between those. We're going to talk, we've got another whole section really getting into these a little bit more, but that's the overview.